So today, if you grab your packet, we're going to be working out of page 39 in our packet. So if you can locate that, that's what we're going to be working out of. You need to pause me real quick to find that. Go ahead. We are going to do the next 2 pages here, put a wrap sort of on what we've been doing all week with our congruent triangles. So yesterday, if you went through that video, did that assignment, most people did that really well. I think we understood the way that we can identify congruent triangles and how all their corresponding parts are going to be congruent. The way that we know triangles are congruent, or what that means, is that all sides, all corresponding sides, and all corresponding angles have to be congruent. And if we know all 6 of those things are going to be congruent, then obviously the triangle itself has to be congruent. So then what these get into is, do we need to know all 6 things, all 3 sides, all 3 angles, or are there shortcuts? And there are shortcuts. So that's what we did earlier this week. So these are now the 5 ways that we can do this. So if you look at this first one, number 1, here's triangle 1, here's triangle 2. What you'll notice is there are no angles marked. So they're not telling us that any angles are marked. But as long as we know all 3 sides, so we know those single ticks are congruent. Here's our double tick marks. Our 3 tick marks are down here and down here. We know all 3 sides are congruent. If we know that, that is one of the ways that we can prove that all triangles are congruent. So we wouldn't necessarily need to know any of the angles if we know all 3 sides are congruent. Okay, so that's our first one. Number 2, you'll notice what we have marked. We have 2 angles that are marked. And we also have the one side that is in between those 2 angles. So if you look at this side, it lies in between the 2 angles that we are given. So what we're given is 2 angles and the side in between. So we write that as angle, side, angle, because the side that you are given lies in between the 2 angles. We talked about that earlier. That will also guarantee our triangles are congruent. Number 3, again, you're given 2 angles to be congruent, and you are given one side. The difference being now, when we have our angles, oops, that's bad. When we have our angles, the 2 angles that you were given, so angle and then an angle, this side that's marked isn't in between those 2 angles. That would be this side. Okay, so it's not angle, side, angle. It is, just go in order. It is angle, angle, side. That's a third way that we can prove that our triangles are going to be congruent. Fourth way, what we're given now is 2 sides and one angle. And if we now look at how those are, how they appear in terms of order, here's angle 1. I'm sorry, side 1, and then here is side 2. This is the angle that is in between the 2 congruent sides. And then the same thing over here. This angle is in between the 2 sides that we are shown to be congruent. So our angle lies in between the 2 sides. So we would show that with our letters. The angle lies in between our 2 sides. Okay, that's number 4. And then the 5th one, what we talked about, this is the one that I left you a little video to watch online, because this little task, if we went through that, didn't really expand on this too much or show this too well. It's called HL. HL stands for hypotenuse. Oops, hypotenuse. Leg. So what that means is, first, you better have a right triangle. We can only have a hypotenuse in a right triangle. So if you look at these 2, this is telling us here, this little notation is that these are 90-degree angles. That means it's a right triangle. If you look at all these other ones, if we go back here, none of these are marked or shown to be 90-degree angles or 90-degree triangles. So we could never use HL, hypotenuse leg, if we don't know that they're right angles. If we do know they're right angles, then what we have to know are these 2 things to be congruent. The hypotenuse of each of them needs to be congruent. So if you remember, this is something we've talked about and you've seen this before. The hypotenuse is the side opposite of your right angle. So here's our right angle. Here are the opposite sides. Notice how those are shown to be congruent. So we satisfy the hypotenuse part. And then the legs are the other 2 sides. At least one of those corresponding set of sides needs to be congruent, and they are. This leg with 2 ticks is congruent to this leg with 2 ticks. So that's what we would call then a hypotenuse leg All right, and then that guarantees that those triangles are congruent. It's going to be those 5. Just recall, if we go side, side, angle, that doesn't work. If you watch the video, they actually spelled it kind of the opposite way, which would be the same, A-S-S. So either way, if we think about this, obviously I don't want to say that word. That does not work. And then the other one that doesn't work is if we know all the angles are given to us, that also wouldn't guarantee that we're congruent. So those little abbreviations will not work. So all you're going to do in this next page and then on the homework assignment, and none of these are particularly long, you're just going to state if these are congruent, and you're going to be using those 5 options. Now there is one little new thing here. So if we look at this problem here, what you were given is this side here and this side here, and these 2 triangles are congruent. So we're given one side. We are also given one angle. All right, and then that is this angle here and this angle here. I'm going to actually do this in red. Maybe it'd be a little easier to see. So this side here is congruent to this side here, and then this angle is congruent to this angle. So if we think about all those 5 options, you know, side, 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 angle, side, angle, side, angle, 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 side, those all require 3 different things. All we are given is 2. So the new thing here that we want to keep in mind, there's one little new element here, is that sometimes our triangles are going to share a side or they're going to share an angle. So in this case, if we look at our triangles, both triangle 1 and triangle 2 share that side. So if they are sharing that side, then it would have to be congruent. So this side is used by triangle number 1. This side is also used by triangle number 2. Therefore, it's basically congruent to itself. So I'd put 3 tick marks there. That shared side gives us one more side. And then if you look at how these are oriented, we have 2 sides, side and a side. So this guy here and then this guy here. So this side and then this side. Oh, that's really messy. Let's do this again. So this side here is our shared side. So that's congruent. And then if we look at the way that these are all oriented, the order, we go side, then we have our angle, and then we have another side. So the angle that we are given lies in between those 2 sides. So we would say, yes, these are congruent. And then you would just say because of side, angle, side. All right. Similar in number 2, you are given 2 angles. So we have 2 angles that are marked. All right, so let me get some colors here to show this. So this angle is congruent to this angle. Get out of here. And then this angle is congruent to this angle. All right, but we have talked about a shared side. If this is triangle 1, this is triangle number 2. Here is a shared side. This side is a side for both triangle number 1 and for triangle number 2. So basically it is congruent to itself. So we are also given one side. So we have 2 angles, 1 side. Notice how this works. We do not have the side in between these 2 angles. That is not marked. We don't know that those are congruent. So we have an angle, angle, and then we have our side. So this would be a yes, and it would be because of angle, angle, side. Okay. 3, similar. We have another shared side. So here's triangle 1. Here's triangle number 2. If we look at the side that's shared, here is the side that is shared between those 2 different triangles. We have 2 angles that are marked. So we have this angle congruent to this angle, and then these 2 angles are congruent. And then if we notice, where does this side lie? It lies in between those 2 angles. So since it lies in between those 2 angles, the side is in between the 2 angles. So this is a yes, and we would call it angle, side, angle, ASA. 4th one, seeing a theme hopefully here. We have these 2 next to each other. We have a shared side. So these guys are basically congruent since they're going to be sharing it between triangle 1 and triangle number 2. Then we have all 3 sides marked. All 3 corresponding sides are congruent. So we would say yes for this one because of side, side, side. All right, these sides. And then the 2 ticks are congruent. And then the 3 ticks is the shared side congruent. All right. Yikes, I don't know what happened here. I think we're going to skip that one because I think it's supposed to be a right angle here. Hypotenuse leg. Let's skip that. That did not format particularly well. So 1 through 4, what we had in numbers 1 through 4 is what we would call, what we did call a shared side. Very common. We can also have what we call a shared angle. Okay, it's also called a vertical angle, but for what we're doing right now, we can also share an angle. So if we look at number 6, we have 1 angle marked. So we have 1 angle. We have 1 side marked. So in order to do any of our, and this is, we aren't told that this is a right triangle, so we need 3 different combinations: side, 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 angle, angle, side, or angle, side, angle. We don't have any shared sides, but if you look right here, one of the pretty common elements of geometry is what is called a shared angle or a vertical angle. And those are angles that are basically across from each other. So let me try to do this in red. So if you notice how this line here and then this line here intersect, they form 2 angles. They form this angle and they form this angle. Let me put 2 ticks on this since we already have 1 tick. And when we have something that looks like this, a shared angle, all right, basically the same angle created by the same 2 points, or 2 different angles created by the same 2 lines, then these angles are congruent. If these angles are directly opposite of each other, these angles are congruent. So if you would then think, we also have 1 angle, another angle. We go angle, side, angle, and then down here, angle, side, angle, so that we can say that yes, this is congruent because of angle, side, angle. 7, we have another point where our triangles are hitting each other. When these 2 lines hit each other, so this line and this line, they form 2 angles that are directly across from each other. Those are congruent angles. Okay, they're shared angles or vertical angles. They're basically across from each other. They have to be congruent. So what we are now given is an angle here, another angle here, and then a side. So that is angle, angle, side, which means we can say yes, we know those triangles are congruent. All right, 8, about as easy as it would get. They're separate. We don't have to worry about a shared side. We don't have to worry about a shared angle. But what we see, all of the sides are congruent. So we can call that side, side, side. So that's a yes. When we get down to number 9, these are the ones you want to be a little bit careful of. We have 1 side that is marked. We have a shared angle that's created right here where these guys intersect. So we know that this angle is congruent to that angle. So we also have an angle. But if you look throughout there really is nothing else that we would know. There are no other angles that are marked to be congruent. There are no other sides that are marked to be congruent. So what we would have to say in this case is that there is not enough information for us to determine, hopefully you can read this, sorry. It's hard to write with this thing, bear with me. Not enough information for us to make any sort of a conclusion. 10, you have 1 angle given to you, here, here. We also have a shared angle that's created at this point right here. So we would know that this angle here is congruent to that angle there. So then we come up with another angle that way. But the third element is missing. We don't know a side that's congruent. So there's pretty much nothing we can do in terms of making a conclusion. So this is another one where we would write there is not enough information. Okay, so that pretty much wraps up our week in terms of congruent triangles. How can we determine if they're congruent? If we do, how can we write congruent statements, so on and so forth. Hopefully it's coming around to you a little bit. Hopefully we haven't thrown too much at you too soon, and we can kind of follow along so we can get something productive done here over the next month. But again, appreciate the time. Keep working at it. Keep pushing yourself and keep trying to stay up to date here. We will see you guys next week. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week.